Good afternoon. Today is Thursday of Parsha's Vayeshev. It's also the 24th of Kislev. It is the day right before Chanukah. Tonight, after sundown, we light the first candle. And I was thinking about something to share that relates to the Parsha as well as to the holiday of Chanukah. And I was reminded of a teaching of one of the Hasidic masters named Rabbi Avram Dov of Avruch, who wrote a book called Bas Ayin. It was just his yahrzeit, actually, about 12 days ago, and was widely celebrated, specifically in Israel. And Rabbi Avram Ber of Avruch was a student of the Chernobyl Rebbes and of Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev. So he was about a fourth generation Hasidic master who made Aliyah to the Holy Land in 1830. And it's interesting that when you look at his life, he, even though he lived in the late 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, when he got to Israel, the last 10 years of his life, he endured a pogrom. He endured natural disasters. He endured pandemic. So all of these, he actually died of one. So it's sort of interesting to look a little bit at his bio and a little snapshot in his 10 years in the Holy Land, and to see such similarities to things that we've been experiencing in recent years, in our lifetimes, which is just very interesting aside. Anyway, so he writes in the Bas Ayin, he's on Parshas Vayeshev. There's a section of discourses on Chanukah, since Chanukah typically falls in the week of Parshat Vayeshev. And he says that according to the Luriana Kabbalah, according to the teachings of the Arizal, the final sealing of a person's year is not done during the high holidays, not even on Hoshana Rabbah, the last day of Sukkot, but is actually Chanukah. Chanukah is really the final sealing of a person's decree for that year, the person's what they have coming to them in the coming year. And he says there must be an allusion to it in Chanukah and in our weekly Torah portion. And he finds it in a very interesting story, one of the great scandalous stories of the Torah, which is in this week's Torah portion, in the fourth reading, we read about the story of Yehuda and his daughter-in-law Tamar. Yehuda, Judah, the fourth son of Jacob, goes off and marries a woman. He has 3 children, and he marries his oldest son, Er, off to a woman named Tamar. Er dies without children. He gives Tamar, his widowed daughter-in-law, to Onan in levirate marriage, and then Onan also dies. And so Yehuda has a third son, Shelah, who's young at the time, and he's afraid that if that Tamar is like a black widow who's going to cause the death of his third son. So he doesn't give her to Shelah, and sends her back home for a while. In the meantime, Yehuda is traveling. His wife passes away, and he ends up having this encounter when Tamar finds out that Yehuda is passing through her town. She masquerades as a prostitute and spends the night with Yehuda. And because he didn't have money with him at the time, he gave her his staff, his walking stick, his signet ring, and his belt as collateral until he would send payment for their night together. Ultimately, that night leads to her becoming pregnant from Yehuda, and word gets out. Yehuda sends payment for this woman who he had spent the night before. Nobody can find her. Nobody knows who she was. She doesn't exist. Anyway, she's left with his collateral. He is left with his payment, and the story is somewhat forgotten. But then turns out that he gets word that his daughter-in-law, Tamar, is pregnant. And it would seem, if she was a married woman waiting for levirate marriage with a third son, so that would be an act of adultery. So Yehuda says, then, well, she's got to be put to death. And so she's taken out to be put to death, and she sends a message to Yehuda with these 3 things that he had given her: the signet ring, his belt, and his staff, and says that I've become pregnant to the one to whom these belong. And she took a risk because Yehuda could have pretended that he had never seen those things before. He didn't know whose they were, realizing obviously that it was him. She was impregnated by him. He could have done that and just, covered for himself, and she would have died. But she took that risk, from which our sages parenthetically tell us that a person should be willing to throw themselves into a furnace, into the fire, burn them and burn, rather than shame somebody publicly. That's a lesson that we learn from her action here, her very heroic and kind gesture. But Yehuda, being the good man that he was, acknowledged that it was from him, and he says no. He owned up to what had happened. He says no, it was actually for me. He didn't know that it was Tamar that he had been with. But here, when confronted with it, he acknowledges that it was from him, and she's saved, and they live happily ever after. They have twin children named Peretz and Zarach. Peretz, interestingly, is the progenitor of King David, the Davidic line, and ultimately, of course, the Messiah. That's maybe another topic for another time. At any rate, that's sort of the general story. Rather than getting into the details of the story and making sense of it, I think it's want to jump into this mystical analysis and how we see the story of Chanukah connected to the high holidays. So the Bas Ayin says like this. He says the verse opens in telling the story. It's about 3 months after the episode of Yehuda, that night that he spends with Tamar, and it's about 3 months, similar to the story that we have now. That the high holidays, that season ended about 3 months ago. Not exactly 3 months. It's really 1 full month and a couple of weeks on either side. It's more like a little bit more than 2, but it's 2 and a bit. So it's like around 3 months time that passes. And Yehuda gets word that his daughter-in-law became pregnant in an adulterous manner. Yehuda is a reference to God. The name Yehuda, the word Yehuda, has the 4 letters of God's name, the ineffable name of God. And so that's a reference to God. So God is told by the administering, by the prosecuting angels, by Satan, that the Jewish people, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, the Jewish people, we know the Talmud says that the Jewish people are compared to Tamar, to a date that has only one heart for God in heaven. That's actually why the Jewish people are compared to a date palm, because we also have one heart just for God. And then Satan says to God, you think that they're just, they have their heart just set on you. Well, as it turns out, they committed adultery. They've been cheating on you. Not just that they've been cheating on you, but they've become pregnant, meaning that they've attached themselves to this sinful behavior, to giving into their own desires and lusts and temptation, in a way that's become who they are. That's their primary focus. That's what they're interested in. God says, well, if they've abandoned me, they've turned on me to such an extent that their sole interest and desire is just as their own self-gratification, well, then they have to be punished. So it's about 3 months after the high holidays. During the high holidays, we were all trying to put our best face forward and pray to God and plead for a good year. And then about 3 months pass, and we've all gone on with our lives and moved on. So Satan comes and says to God, look, these people, they didn't mean what they were telling you during the high holiday season. They've gone another way. They've gone astray. But then the Jewish people, Tamar, sends to God, to Yehuda, sends 3 things. Sends the signet ring, sends the belt, and the staff. And so these things symbolize the Chanukah menorah. You have the signet ring recalls the oil that was used in the temple during the miracle of Chanukah, that was sealed with the seal of the high priest. So you've got the seal. You've got the sila, the belt that represents the wick, and the staff, which represents the candelabra, the menorah. And so these 3 things show up. The Jewish people say to God, look, it's 3 months out. We've all gone our separate ways. We've gone our way. You've gone your way. And look, we're still here. We're lighting the menorah. It's dark outside, and yet we're kindling our menorah because we're still only have our heart set on you. And when God sees this, God says, you know what? You're right. Just like in the story of Judah, I mentioned this in the beginning in that overview. But Judah's response to Tamar was, Tzadka mimeni. She bested me. She's correct. She's right. She is pregnant from me. And so he acknowledges that, and he takes the responsibility and accountability. So here, the same thing. God says, "Tzad kamimeni." God says, if it's true that if it seems on the surface that the people have gone off and gone astray, it's not their fault. It's my fault. It's my fault, because the verse tells us in the story of Judah and Tamar that Judah says that she's pregnant for me, and she's justified because I didn't give her to my son Shelah. So because I didn't give her to my son Shelah, she was left in limbo with no possible other alternative. And Judah at the time, pre Mount Sinai, would be a legitimate person for her to be with. So therefore, that's what happened. And so God says to Satan, he says, no, you're misrepresenting the situation. You're saying that the Jewish people have abandoned me, but in truth, it's the opposite. In truth, the reason that maybe things seem that it appears on the surface that they've gone astray is not because they have. Truthfully, they haven't. Look at the candelabra, look at the menorah, look how they keep looking for me, they keep finding me. The issue is it's my fault. I haven't given them Shelah. Shelah, which is a similar word to the word Shiloh, which is a reference to the Messiah. That God says it's my fault that this exile, the darkness, the suffering that they endure is my fault because I haven't sent them their righteous Redeemer, Mashiach Tzidkenu, the righteous Messiah. And so I feel like this is an important message, timely message for now, when people want to talk about being about punishment, about deserving. The Jewish people, our community, we've been going through a very hard time these last few months since the high holidays, and it's rather than point fingers, we take this lesson that no, the Jewish people, what we see is a resurgence. You see that even in our darkest hour, even a time when it seems that God has turned his back on us, Jews have been looking to engage and do more, to be more Jewish, more proudly Jewish, more outwardly Jewish, to do more Jewish things, to live more Jewishly. That's the response that we've been seeing, which tells us that whatever we've been doing pre this darkness was not really the true us. The true us comes out now. That's the true us. And the problems that we face, that's on God. That's because God is the one who's withheld salvation, redemption. It's God who continues to allow us to languish in this exile that we keep demanding that he stop. And may we merit that this Chanukah, we light up the darkness, we eradicate the darkness with all the light of goodness, of godliness, of divinity, of truth, so that we banish the darkness once and for all, and we live an illuminated life, and a life where God finally does decide to give us Shelah Benoi, his son Shelah Mashiach, may it be already now, speedily in our days. Shabbat Shalom and Chanukah Sameach.